Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. If you're new to my channel, my name is Rita and I do book and movie reviews in the hopes of introducing you to your next favorite. And it's been a while since I've shared new content. Basically, I've moved to a new place, and as you bibliophiles out there, I'm sure will be able to relate, it takes a long time to pack up all those books. And so for about a month, I don't think I created any new content. And then the most wonderful thing happened, and I got this beautiful edition of Pride and Prejudice by Chronicle Books through the post, and I just couldn't wait to read Pride and Prejudice again. And this edition by Chronicle Books contains 19 replicas of letters from Pride and Prejudice. And so this is going to be my review of this edition. If you've watched my video, my top 5 books, then you know that I'm a die-hard Jane Austen fan. I am a huge fan of hers. I have a PhD on Austen, and I am also incredibly interested in anything on her, and particularly anything that could come under the heading of Austen in popular culture. And so this book is a really exciting addition to that. I had very high expectations for this book, and I'm very happy to say that it's actually exceeded those. So first of all, as you can see, the cover is really beautiful, and I just love the gold letters and the details with the feathers here, the peacock feathers, which is, I think, a really fun shout out to the George Allen's 1894 Peacock edition that every single Austen fan would love to have. I know I'm still waiting for a very kind benefactor to one day send one my way. And so this edition was curated by the filmmaker Barbara Heller, and it opens with an introduction in which she tells us about how she got the idea for this book. So Heller, in preparation for this book, consulted experts on the British Postal Service in this period so that she could find out everything she needed to about letters in Austen's time. And I have to say, I feel like whenever you study Austen, you inevitably miss something. So I've spent 4 years with her, and I would have never spent 4 years with anyone else. And also with 2 more years to kind of go through my thesis again. And yet, reading this just made me realize that there is so much more to her period that I didn't know. And one of them, which sounded really complicated from the introduction, is the different postal marks that each letter should have had. And so it sounds like Heller dedicated quite a lot of attention to making sure that those were accurate. And another thing that Heller talks about in the introduction that I think most Austen readers won't know is that in this period, whenever you sent a letter, it wouldn't have been the sender to pay for it, it would have been the recipient. So when you would pay for a letter, the cost would be based on the distance it had traveled from its origin to its destination, and also would be based on the number of sheets that it contained. And so I had never realized that this is, for example, why when in Emma, Miss Bates tells us that Jane Fairfax has only written 1 sheet for a letter, we know that this is because she knows that her aunt can't afford to pay for an extra one. And so we miss that very important detail about what Jane Fairfax is like as a person if we don't have this context into the Postal Service. Given how important letters are in Pride and Prejudice, making an edition like this was a really good idea. So even though we can't know for sure because the initial manuscripts don't survive, we believe that both Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice started out as epistolary novels, which basically means that the novels would have consisted of a series of letters. And this kind of format was pretty popular a few years before Austen started writing, but it was going out of fashion around this time. So Frances Burney, for example, an author that she greatly admired, when she published her first novel, Evelina, in 1778, this was written as a series of letters. However, when in 1782 she wrote her novel Cecilia, which is my favorite, then she had given up this style by then. So this indicates that by the time Austen started playing around with the genre of the novel, after she had written Love and Friendship and Lady Susan and was moving on to longer novels such as Sense and Sensibility, she realized that maybe this format wouldn't serve her as well. And I have to say, I was really looking forward to this, and being able to just pick up a letter as you are reading what is going on, opening it up and reading it for yourself was really like I was receiving the letter through the post myself. And I found that it really allowed me to immerse myself into the novel. I actually felt like it was like being on the set of a new Pride and Prejudice adaptation, and I honestly felt that if someone had handed me in the letter and also on top of that dressed me up in Regency costume, that I would have just acted out the scene, because slightly to my embarrassment, I found myself opening the letter with huge expectations and just reading through it out loud as if I had just received it, and gasping at things that I knew were coming, but was still very exciting to read about. And so for someone who has not just read Pride and Prejudice many times, but desiccated it over and over again, it was a real treat to be able to experience the novel in this new way again. And so the letter I was looking forward to the most will come as no surprise to you. It was Mr. Darcy's letter, and because it's so huge, it immediately sticks out from all the other letters. And so I had to really stop myself from just opening it up, because I really wanted to follow the order in the book. And this is actually quite hard to fold back again, but here is the letter. And this just made me realize that, yes, you would need all night to write this. No wonder he stayed up all night and finished it at 8 in the morning. This is quite a lot. And this is probably the most significant letter in the whole of the novel, because it represents a real watershed moment in the novel in which the nature of the relationship between Elizabeth and Darcy goes through a complete shift. And the information that's contained in here could only have come in a letter. Elizabeth is so completely inclined to dislike Darcy that she really needs the time to sit down, read and reread the letter over and over again, and to really consider what Darcy is saying in order for her to realize that she had been wrong about him before. And it's this ability for reading and interpreting, and this resistance to the inclination to just judge something based on a first impression, get it? And to judge someone too quickly, that subsequently allows Elizabeth to visit Pemberley and to really be able to read the space for clues as to what it can tell her about Darcy, and also as a potential for herself as his wife. And so without this letter, that episode could have never happened. The other letter that I couldn't wait to read will also probably not come as a surprise. It's the one that Lydia sends after she elopes with Wickham. And I know we all love Austen because of her ability to portray people and what makes them in a really vivid, realistic way. And this letter is a letter that just does that so well for Lydia. And if you have a Lydia in your family, this will very much resonate with you. So I loved how Hella used the design of the letter to communicate what kind of person Lydia is. And so this letter is written on the back of fashion plates, which I think perfectly encapsulates Lydia's vapid character, the looseness of her upbringing, which has all led to this moment, her mother's feeding of all her fancies and her willingness to have her own way, and also her obsession with spending money on clothes and everything else that she could possibly want. And so the impulsiveness with which this decision is made, this elopement, is perfectly portrayed through this letter that is just written in a hurried way. So from this, we can tell that this wasn't a well-planned, well-considered thing. And this is conceived in such a beautiful way through this. So by looking at this, it's so obvious to us that Lydia hasn't thought this through. And so she doesn't realize what this will do to her. She doesn't realize what this will do to her family. She does not care who she is hurting. And this is obvious through the language that she uses when she says, "You will laugh when you know what has happened." She thinks this is all a big joke. But Hella found this, I think, really creative way of also conveying it through the paper in which she is writing it. And finally, this one might be more of a surprise as to why I picked this one as the third and final letter to focus on. But this is from Mr. Collins, and it follows that one really quickly. This is a letter that he sends Mr. Bennet when he finds out what happened to Lydia. And so I think that both the language in the letter, but also the design of it that was picked by the artists, just really expresses what kind of person Mr. Collins is. So all the D's in the letter are elongated, so it kind of goes like this. And this is something that, interestingly, in this edition, Mr. Collins shares with Miss Bingley, and she would be devastated, by the way. And I think it's such a great way of expressing his pomposity. All of Mr. Collins is pompous, and even his calligraphy is. And so every time I reread one of Austen's novels, I always notice something that wasn't completely clear to me before. And this time around, it was funny for me to notice that it was something about Mr. Collins. So I couldn't help but notice how she portrays Mr. Collins as someone who is clearly a bad clergyman, someone who completely lacks the right values or the inclination to actually be good at his job. And it's so clear that he just picked it because it was his biggest chance of getting money, basically. This was the job that would get him the most money. And this letter just expresses it so well when he tells Mr. Bennet that the death of your daughter would have been a blessing in comparison to the elopement. This just expresses his personality so well. Hella says at the beginning of her introduction then that when bits of letters were paraphrased, she wrote what was missing in order to replicate the full letter. And this is done very well throughout, and these bits don't stand out from the rest of the letters because basically they are only telling something that is already in the text. The only exception I found to this was the last letter from Mr. Collins, which ends with, "Dear Charlotte and I have excellent news. We are in expectation of a young olive branch. Lady Catherine is certain we shall be blessed with a son, and has graciously condescended to select his name." So this last sentence was the only one which filled things that weren't in the text. So funny as it is, and plausible as it is that Lady Catherine would have picked the name of the child, this was the only instance that stood out for me as something that wasn't in the text. So I would have wondered whether this should have been included. But otherwise, I think this was done very, very well. So that is my review for this book. I absolutely loved this edition, and I'm so happy that I got to experience Pride and Prejudice in this new way. I think it was an excellent idea, very well conceived, and I will not hesitate to recommend this to any Austen fans out there as a very good Christmas present as well. Okay everyone, that was my video for this week. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to hear about me in between videos, then you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and also on Goodreads, and all the links for those are below this video. And until next week, I hope you stay well and safe, and you keep reading, and I'll see you then.